Your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff this Friday on SchiffRadio.com. Seeing what happens in the market today. Yesterday's big drop. You know, at one point we were down over 500 points yesterday. I don't think we closed down that bad. I think it was under 400 points by the time they rang the bell. But it was a big day for the dollar, another huge day for the Treasury market. Treasury yields are backing up slightly today, but we're still at around 2.8 on the 30-year and 1.75 on the 10-year. Big update for the dollar index, again, particularly against the economically sensitive commodity-type currencies, Canadian, Aussie dollars. Really, the metals got crushed. Gold was down about $50. It's down another $50 today. Silver down another $2.50, all the way back down around 32 and change. Remember, this is the lows of the last correction. I think the real support in the silver market is around the $30 level, so we'll see if that support can be challenged with a lot of the selling that's coming in right now. You know, it does look a lot like 2008. I don't think it's going to play out like 2008, but I think it's going to scare some people into thinking that it's going to be like 2008. That's what the markets are there to do. They're there to shake out a lot of the people who lack conviction, who are overly leveraged, who really don't understand what's going on, and who are just playing momentum. And I think that's what's happening. I think, there's probably a lot of forced liquidation going on among the hedge fund community and other leverage players. Today, the Dow is off on a weak note. In fact, it's not down as much as it would have been had we opened where the futures were trading a couple hours before the open. But the Dow is off about 55 points right now. I think this is the low on the day, at least for the official trading hours. All the European markets, again, off, but now way off their lows in Europe, although Asian markets, again, got hammered. I mean, look at the Hang Seng at a new 52-week low. The Hang Seng is all the way at the lowest it's been since May of 2009, over a 2-year low in Hong Kong stocks. Now, the lowest those stocks got in 2008 was down around 10,600. So, you know, we're still somewhat 70% above those lows. But who knows? I mean, the market is under a lot of pressure. Of course, the valuations in a lot of the stocks that trade on that exchange are incredible compared to the valuations here in the U.S. I mean, stocks there are legitimately very inexpensive. But, you know, there are some serious problems in China. There's a lot of positive things there, but they are going through problems with inflation. That is a self-inflicted wound, and the Chinese government is going about it the wrong way. Rather than causing the inflation by printing RMB to buy dollars, they're simply trying to put the brakes on their economy, which is also putting the brakes on the stock market. Again, I think these are long-term buying opportunities for the people that are inclined to take some risk. I think if you're going to take risk, betting on China is probably one of the better risks that you can take as far as how much upside potential I believe there is in that market over the long run. You know, before the show came on the air, I was watching CNBC, and I was watching these hearings with these Solyndra executives. And if you're not familiar with the Solyndra saga, this was the company that about 2 years ago, President Obama, heralded as the poster boy for the success of the stimulus, the partnership between government and business, where Obama was going to pick a winner. And he was sure that Solyndra was a winner because, after all, it was green technology. It was solar power. It was a liberal's, fantasy dream. And he was so excited about saving this company. And so he came to the rescue with $500 million worth of loan guarantees. Now, of course, it wasn't his money that he was in loaning or investing. It was our money. It was taxpayer money. So, in other words, he really didn't care. And, of course, the company went bankrupt. It's in bankruptcy, and we're going to lose. You, me, everybody who were forced to make this harebrained investment because Obama thought it was good. And it failed miserably. And of course, Obama said, hey, this is a success. This shows how the stimulus worked because we saved all these jobs. We didn't save the jobs. The jobs are gone. We postponed the inevitable, but at what cost? $500 million of taxpayer money. And of course, when Obama guaranteed these loans, what company was denied credit? What company that might have survived, that might have been able to use the loans productively? What company was denied credit so Obama's poster child for green energy could get the credit instead? Because remember, there is for the Americans that not only lost the $500 million, but we had to pay for that photo op so President Obama can throw some fresh meat to his base, to the environmentalists who are so great, so concerned that we move towards these green energy. And so the interesting thing about these hearings is that, they're all there in front of Congress. Of course, I was there, a week ago. And by the way, Dennis Kucinich, who was one of the congressmen who was at that hearing, is our guest today, coming up at the top of the next half hour. Unfortunately, he can only stay for one segment because he's got to run and vote. But I appreciate him coming on. We're going to get his take on my testimony and if he thinks it resonated beyond the people that were there. But anyway, I'm watching these hearings, and everybody is there before Congress, and Congress is asking them questions because they want to know, what was going on. I mean, when you came to the government requesting these loan guarantees, I mean, what did you know? Were you forthright? Were you not being totally honest with us? Of course, they want to get to the bottom of how this company, collapsed so quickly when it appeared so promising just 2 years ago. And of course, it wasn't promising because that's why the government had to guarantee the loans, because the free market didn't want to loan them any money. I think that the fact that they needed a loan guarantee is kind of proof that there was a problem, because if there wasn't a problem, they wouldn't need the guarantee. But again, they're thinking there must have been some kind of fraud here, what went on, and of course, all the blaming the Fifth. It's just fun to watch them, just refuse to answer the questions, invoking their Fifth Amendment rights, which of course they have every right to do. But I'm sure that these guys, totally beat Obama. And since he's so naive, he's never actually really had a job or invested any money. He's totally clueless. Yet he thinks he can micromanage the entire economy. Well, he's going to have no more success with the economy or health care than he did with Solyndra, because that is President Obama's, that's a good testament to his ability to judge the market and the economy. Anyway, don't go away. We'll be back. This is the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. And this is Peter Schiff. You are listening to SchiffRadio.com. And the markets continue to see a little pressure, although nothing like yesterday, although the Dow's now down about 77 points. But, it is ominous in the past when you have these big declines. What's happened before is you get the big drop on Thursday, and then, you get a little volatility on Friday, and then they really put the hammer down on Monday, a la 1987. But we've seen these Thursday, Friday, Monday combinations before. And many times they result in a buying opportunity because you get a big flush out on the Monday, or maybe a little bit on a gap down on the following Tuesday, and then maybe you get a rally. We'll see if we get a lot of fireworks. Again, I've been saying I think the Dow can get below 10,000. We still need to drop another 650 points. But I still feel that below that, there's not a lot of downside, because I do believe that the Fed will come riding in on its white horse, or rather its white printing press, and come to the rescue. Now, I don't think they should do that, but I'm pretty sure that they will. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Anyway, in the meantime, let me grab a couple of calls. First on hold is going to be Thomas calling from India. Is that true?
Yeah, hi, Peter. Yeah, I'm calling from India.
Okay, I forget if we've gotten any. Yeah, go ahead. I forget if we've gotten calls from India yet, but nice to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of yours, following you since last 10 months. I had a question about you, for the Indian economy. I don't think you follow it really closely as you follow others, but what do you think about the Indian economy, and, what would you suggest your listeners?
Yeah, I like India. I'm long-term bullish. We toyed with the idea of an India fund, but we didn't launch it yet. It's hard to buy Indian stocks. It's not as easy as buying stocks in other markets. So we thought that we could have done it through a fund formula, but I thought it would be too narrow a fund for me to launch at the moment because it's just the economics of this. It's much easier. I might be doing something like that. With my offshore company, outside the United States, it's so much less expensive to launch these products because the regulations are so much fewer that you have a lot more flexibility operating from out of the country to offer all sorts of investment options. But in the United States, everything you do is so expensive because of the rules and the regulations that you have to have a big enough market for the product to overcome the cost of setting it up and all that. And so I thought that at this stage in the game that might have been too narrow. But, we have in the past bought some closed-end funds trading in London or things like that have some Indian positions. But to invest directly in the Indian market, it's always been very difficult. They have rules that make it harder for individual investors just to buy stocks over there. But I like, what's happening and, the Indian rupiah. I mean, I'm sure you remember the days when the rupiah was always falling. Now they're trying, like other countries, to stop it from rising, which I think is a mistake. But I think, you've got a lot of young people in India and, the problem with India has always been too much government. And that's, generally the problem everywhere. I think they're learning from those mistakes and they are making some progress. What's your perspective living there?
I see it. It's growing. It's been a good progress. But yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of government and there's a lot of big companies can't move faster. They have a lot of regulatory issues, and it takes a long time to make progress.
Yeah, well, anyway, hey, I really appreciate your listening. I hope I've got some more fans living there in India. We've got quite a few Indian Americans that are working here at Europe Pacific Capital, particularly out in the LA office. We ended up to have quite a good sale. Because a lot of Indians, and America benefited because a lot of people left India a long time ago, some really bright people, because they wanted more freedom, and so they came to America. And as a minority group, Indians have been extremely successful here in the United States as entrepreneurs, particularly in the field of technology. And so we have benefited dramatically from a brain drain from India to America. But I think that's going to stop, and I think fewer people are going to leave India for America. I think they're going to seek their fortune either in India or other places, and eventually some of the Indian Americans who are living here might end up going home because there'll be too many taxes and too many rules here, and they might see better opportunities back in the homeland. I don't know. I think maybe we lost the caller. We did have a pretty bad connection. But anyway, let me go forward to Don, who's calling a little bit more local from Houston, Texas. Don, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Yeah, I added you to my Facebook, and then I was looking at your testimony before Congress on YouTube, and you did a wonderful job as always. But then also I look at and then also there's some video clips about some accusation about your stock portfolio or stock picks. Did you actually talk about that before? And
well, yeah, I mean there's always been a group of people who have wanted to undermine my credibility. And one of the ways they do that is they find a stock pick that I made that went down, and then they say, look, see, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's a stock that went down. Nobody bats 1,000 when it comes to the stock market, particularly the speculative part of it. I mean, we do a lot of investing where I recommend stocks for people that I think are on a spectrum of speculative to conservative, at least from a foreign perspective, because of course everything that's foreign is going to be speculative according to the regulators. But there are stocks that I believe are more appropriate for people who that want to get their money out of the country in a conservative way. And then, of course, we do buy a lot of speculative stocks, and we tell people, hey, these are speculative stocks. And, some of them, you might buy a speculative stock that goes up 10 times. But, of course, you might buy another one that goes to zero. I mean, that's, it's like Babe Ruth. He led the league in home runs, but he also led the league in strikeouts. And so if you made a montage of all of Babe Ruth's strikeouts, you could say, hey, this is the worst batter ever. Look at all these strikeouts. And you don't show the home runs. So people will find the stock picks that didn't work out in the speculative arena and say, hey, here's a stock pick that was really bad. Schiff doesn't know what he's doing. Of course, they ignore whatever stock picks I might have made that had gone the other way. Of course, they don't want to show those. They simply want to show the ones that went down. And of course, they also want to point to 2008, which was a year where all of the stocks that we owned pretty much went down. I mean, the stock markets went down, so our stock portfolios went down. I mean, we're not short sellers. We buy stocks, and they went down with all the other stocks in 2008. And of course, they say, you see, Peter Schiff was wrong. His stocks went down. My forecasts were for the economy, what was going to happen in the economy, and I think I got that right. Now, in the short run, my stocks went down, but I mean, I'm not a short-term speculator. And meantime, two of the things that happened that I didn't foresee was that we had a big rally in the dollar, and so we had a big drop in gold and commodities, which undermined my strategy. But the dollar's rally was temporary, and to my credit, I acknowledged that I thought it was temporary. I thought it was a head fake. And ultimately, the dollar went on to make new lows, and gold prices made new highs. So I think, my strategy was correct. It might have been a little premature as far as the investment strategy, but I think my economic forecasting of the big picture I think that was dead on. I don't think I got any of that wrong. I might have got the timing a little wrong, but it's, the timing, how do you get the timing perfectly? I mean, the fact that if you're trying to criticize me because I didn't do it perfect, I mean, at least I got a lot closer than most people. Most people were completely off the mark. They had no idea that there was even a crisis to prepare for. At least I saw the crisis coming and tried to prepare for it. You can criticize how I prepared for it and say, hey, maybe you could have done a better job, but hey, at least I did it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I agree with you that you got the big picture correct, but the gold stocks been tumbling since May of this year. But the radio show, you keep asking people to buy in. I don't know.
We're running out of time. I'm not really sure the point you're trying to make here. Maybe you want to try calling back. I guess I got a break coming up, and then Dennis Kucinich will be joining us. So stick around. You're listening to Peter Schiff on Schiff Radio. And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Joining me now is Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who was a member of the panel where I testified last week in front of the House Oversight and Government Reform panel. Dennis Kucinich actually ran for president of the United States twice before, in 2004 and 2008. Dennis, thanks for being on my show. And, is there any chance you might throw your hat in a ring and challenge Obama? Third time's the charm,
I don't know what the third time is the charm is, but I'm not running this year.
Well, that's an old saying, but I'd love to see you in the race, especially if it could be you versus Ron Paul. That would be a presidential race I could really wrap my arms around.
Well, I will tell you, I have a great deal of respect for Ron Paul. He and I have stood together on a number of important issues, including challenging the wars and also challenging the Federal Reserve and its ineffectiveness and its unfortunate ability to create money out of nothing and just give it to banks. And this is something that Ron Paul was one of the first people in Congress to identify, do something about, and I appreciate his presence in American politics.
Yeah. And we appreciate your help. But I wanted to bring you on the show to try to get your reaction and any reaction that you might sense from some of the other representatives to my testimony and my basically blaming our poor economic performance and lack of jobs on the government itself. In fact, rather than having a hearing, if the government wants to know why jobs are disappearing, all they need is a mirror.
Well, first of all, let me say something here. And when I received the invitation to be on your show, I took it not because you and I agree, but because I felt that of all the witnesses that I've seen for years who have been in front of our committee, you were certainly one of the most provocative because your economic views are pretty well developed, and you are really smart. And I thought, this is somebody who at least you can have a discussion with. Now, here's does the government play a role in what happens in the economy? Of course it does. Is it the only factor? today? I don't think so. I think there are corporations who have extraordinary powers to move jobs and to move money around. And there are nations who are competing with the United States now who have great advantages because of the way they manage their trade, the way they handle their currency policies, and frankly, some conditions in their own country that we wouldn't want, but they capitalize on. So, I'm interested actually in what you think. I don't usually do this with talk show hosts, but I'm interested in what you think because I think
although talk show host this is my hobby. My day job is I work in finance and in banking. But, what your point about corporations are free to move jobs around because they're trying to maximize profits for their shareholders, which is their function. And the problem is, why, in order to maximize profits, do they have to move the jobs offshore? And from my perspective, it's because the government, through all the regulations and the litigation climate that the regulations have fostered, it is so expensive to do things here that companies have to go offshore. I mean, I've done the same thing myself. In fact, I just remarked earlier on the show that the cost of launching mutual funds outside the United States is so much lower that it's so much easier to do it. I mean, here, the compliance costs are so high that it stifles businesses, and it actually forces them to move parts of their businesses or all of their business offshore to get away from the costs.
Well, the finance economy, I don't know how much I can argue with you on that, but I want to ask you a question. I saw a report the other day that that in California, a bridge, instead of being built in the United States, was actually built. A good part of it was made in China and shipped over because they said that they could save $400 million. It's part of the East. It's one of the big bridges in the Bay Area. Yeah. And what I was wondering is, the story talked about the main advantage, which was lower wages. That in effect, people in China might make $1.25 an hour, as opposed to United States a worker in the steel industry who may make, depending on the rate of entry, anywhere between 8 or 20 and 25. Do you think that we ought to be going for lower wages?
Well, I think that lower wages, unfortunately, are going to be part of the solution to our problem because we've destroyed our capital. But I think one of the reasons...
How do you maintain a middle class, though? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah. Yeah, well, right now we have millions and millions of people who are never going to get jobs, so how are they ever going to get into the middle class? But, at one point, we used to pay the highest wages in the world, yet we made the cheapest stuff in the world. And can you imagine if China has to ship all this bridge all the way to California from China, how much is that costing? I mean, we should be able to make stuff cheaper ourselves. I don't think the biggest part of the labor cost is the labor itself. I think it's a lot of the cost that gets piled on through the regulatory and tax burdens and the legal climate that makes it riskier and more expensive to use domestic labor, and so it ends up being cheaper. But the solution isn't to force companies to use more expensive American production costs, because that's just going to lower our standard of living. The solution is to figure out what government is doing to make us so unproductive, to make it so it's cheaper to build the bridge in China and import it rather than just build it right here, because it shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, you give government, I think, much more credit in terms of its ability to be a singular force in this economy, and when you analyze what's gone wrong. My view is that government hasn't done enough, that it stayed on the sideline while a bubble was growing in
well, they didn't stay on the sidelines. The government blew the bubble. The Federal Reserve inflated it, and the government kept it going with Fannie and Freddie. So the private sector never would have...
What I meant, Peter, is that the government didn't intervene while there were no doc and low doc loans.
Oh, I know. I mean, I was out there
driving a bubble, and I'm wondering that with $700 billion bailout, which I did not vote for because I didn't want the government to be picking winners and losers in the finance sector, and another $1.2 trillion created by the Fed for a distribution to banks, and even last week, the Fed participating in a bailout of European banks. It seems that when the banking industry is in trouble, they run to the government for help.
Well, I know, and the government shouldn't give it to them. That's the problem. And it's a moral hazard if the banks know that whenever they're in trouble, the government's going to bail them out, because then they'll take tremendous risks for their own gain, knowing that they can put the losses off on the taxpayers.
See, if you and I can agree on that much, and we do, I'm wondering if we recognize that the government had enough of an ability to put trillions of dollars out towards banking. But at the same time, if Wall Street knows that governments save their bacon, then how can you, at the same time, in recognizing that, even though we both agree that shouldn't be done, how could we, or why would we want to diminish the potentially salutary role that government could play with the private sector in incentivizing?
Well, I don't think it plays a salvatory role. I think the private sector incentivizes businesses all by itself. When the government interferes, it screws up those incentives. It messes them up. If the government just gets out of the way, I mean, if the government didn't have all the unemployment benefits and we didn't have all these labor laws, we would be building bridges in the United States, because the alternative would be people would have no jobs. They'd have no source of income. They might not be able to eat. So they would work, and we would bring down the cost of living. And the people who benefit the most from a falling cost of living because prices go down is the poorest people who spend most of their money. And I also want to make one point. The reason that the government didn't do anything to prick the housing bubble, and there was so much evidence that bubble was there, because nobody wanted to rain on the parade. The politicians loved the housing bubble because the voters loved it, because the voters thought they were getting rich for nothing, and no congressman, nobody in the government wanted to upset that apple cart. Nobody wanted to tell people that they had to work for a living, that they couldn't get rich by owning a home. It wasn't until after the bubble burst that the politicians started to think it was a bad idea and look for somebody to blame.
Let me ask you this, because you strike me as somebody who is, you're pretty disciplined in terms of your economics, and but at the same time you have to have a sense of fairness. Can you tell me, how is it possible in this economy, or when you had corporations doing so well for a long time, that 120 million Americans don't have any wealth or just debts? And that you have.
Well, yeah, I know. This is years and years of bad policy that has discouraged savings and encouraged credit and debt. It wasn't like this. My grandparents didn't have any debt. The chairman of the committee, Isa, he brought up Henry Ford and his workers, and I pointed out that Henry Ford paid his workers the equivalent of $2,500 a week, and that's twice as much as Ford pays the workers today. And there was no government mandates. There were no unions. There were no minimum wage. That was the free market that was enabling Americans to work without even a high school degree and earn enough money to support a wife and kids and not have to have any debt. And all of that was possible because we were free, because the government left us alone. It didn't try to micromanage. It didn't have all these taxes, because remember, there were no income taxes then. There were no payroll taxes then. We were the type of country that the founding fathers envisioned.
Well, we have a debt-based economic system now where debt drives everything, and and people, you have a situation where you have 150 million people have less wealth than the top 400 individuals.
Absolutely, because the founding fathers warned us that this was going to happen. This is the consequence of fiat money, of central government planning, of central banking. That's what's happened. I mean, the government has basically bled the middle class dry. Yes, these policies benefit bankers and financiers. That's a huge problem. But they give capitalists a bad name, because most of the people who make their money in this country don't make it shuffling paper or on Wall Street and speculating. And we need people. People create wealth in a free market. They benefit everybody. That's Adam Smith. That's the invisible hand. They build a better mousetrap. They produce products. They provide services at low cost that benefits the poor and the middle class. And in the process, they create jobs for everyone.
And do you think that the Fed's monetary policy has helped or hurt the country?
Oh, it's helped destroy the country. It's been a disaster. That's why when I wrote my book Crash Proof, I basically said the biggest architect of the collapse was Alan Greenspan. I mean, I used to call him a traitor, and I think one day we'll view him that way. And of course, he's got his disciple Ben Bernanke following in his footsteps. But what they're doing, Perry's talked about it being treasonous. I agree. I think it is treason. I think counterfeiting was a federal offense, and I think people that do it should be punished. But this is the biggest problem that we have. It's the poison in our system, and rather than recognizing it, we're just taking bigger doses of it. That's what the stimulus is all about.
Well, what about? But if you have an economy that at this point there's a broad consensus of moving towards I guess it would be called a double-dip recession. What do you do if the private sector is afraid of moving forward and the public sector doesn't do anything? We could be headed for a very sharp decline.
Well, we're not only heading for it, we're in it. I mean, it's not a double dip, it's a depression. And to understand why the economy isn't working, it's because the government has so misallocated resources. Capital is not where it's supposed to be. Labor is not where it's supposed to be. Prices are wrong. Wages are wrong. Interest rates are wrong. So the market can't function. Just like during the 1930s. The government has to get out of the way and allow things to be reset so businesses can invest. Right now, everybody is loaded up with debt. Everything is mispriced and misallocated. Capitalism cannot work when the government is in the way. And so if we get the government out of the way, swallow, bite the bullet, take the pain, there is massive gain at the other end of this. But if we continue to try to solve the problem with more government, it's going to be a depression, and it will be worse than the 1930s. But hey, I understand you've got to run. I really appreciate your being on the show, and I think you've got an open mind, and I enjoy talking with you.
And I'd like to have another conversation soon. Thanks again.
Well, anytime you want to be on the show again, just give the producers a call. We'd love to have you back. Anyway, hey, this has been Peter Schiff. Stick around. We've got more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up after this. And we are back. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. And I'm going to take a few calls between now and the end of the hour. And then, of course, the top of the next hour, I want to talk about last night's presidential debates. So if anybody watched the debates, maybe it'd be a good topic for people to call in to share their perspective on it. I'll give you mine, and then if anybody else has anything to add, it'd be interesting talking points. But in the meantime, let me go back to the phones. On hold now is John calling from Richmond, Virginia. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, glad to be with you. I'm a big fan of yours.
Thanks.
I had a debate with a friend of mine about government supporting certain industries, and should the U.S. respond, or do we have to respond to, say, China subsidizing some of their industries if we can't compete at those lower prices? How would you respond to that from your perspective?
Well, the reason we can't compete is because, the economy is uncompetitive at the moment, given all of the things that the government has done. But, it doesn't make any sense that China can make things cheaper than we can and then ship them all the way over here. Now, you could say, well, it's all about low wages, but, what about the cost of transporting these things? I mean, that's a big chunk. To get all that stuff over here. I mean, we're over here, so we would have that proximity advantage on some of these things, particularly like Congressman Kucinich was talking about building a bridge. I mean, it would seem to me that the transportation costs of getting all that material for the bridge over here, I think the real thing is they've got the machinery, they've got the capital, they've got to make that stuff. It's not the labor. I think it's the capital investment that is happening in China that's not happening here, that's making their workers so much more productive. It can't just be the wages. That's not the cost. I mean, maybe if you're sewing socks or something, but make it a bridge. I mean, it's got to be about some of the capital, and so we need to make those investments here. And we would make them here if we had a more competitive tax structure, if we had a more competitive labor structure, if the government didn't make it so expensive to hire people and so risky to hire people. And look, we've got lots of people that could be working. This labor is going idle. Think about all the people collecting welfare checks, collecting unemployment checks. What if these people were working? Even if it was at low wages, they'd be working. they'd be helping to increase our productivity. They'd be helping to lower our cost of living, which would mean that those low wages would go further. You know, the people in China who are working for low wages, they're not starving. I mean, they're eating. I mean, they're buying stuff. They're not living in, you know, I mean, they're not living as well as we are, but it's, you know, they're existing. And to say, oh, well, you know, we're above all that, as if you'd say, well, we can't work for low wages. We're Americans. Well, then we're not going to work, because the question isn't working for high wages or working for low wages. Obviously, everybody would rather work for high wages. That's not the choice. The choice is that you work for a low wage or you don't work at all. And, you know, I'd rather have people working at low wages than not working. And the thing is, just because you're working at a low wage today doesn't mean you're always going to work at a low wage. It doesn't mean that you can never get a raise as you become more productive, as you acquire more skills, as the company that you're working for becomes more profitable. No, but you got to get started. I mean, if you never get that first job, you're never going to get that first raise.
Yeah, good point. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the call. Next up is, what is that, Joe on the line from Austin, Texas. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking my call. I got a question. Just want to see what your free market perspective would be in response to this. I was in Sri Lanka a few months ago, and on the road, and if you haven't been there in Colombo, the roads are very crazy, and it's very crowded on the roads.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Sri Lanka, because the producer of this radio show is on his honeymoon now in Sri Lanka.
Oh, it's a beautiful country. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
My wife's actually from there, so. Anyway, I was on the road in Colombo with a friend, and he told me that the taxes on the cars there for a new car is like the government puts on like 100 or 200% tax on the purchase of any automobile there. So, you know, a $20,000 car would cost you 40 or 60 with taxes. And I thought that was crazy. And
well, Alfred, do they have an income tax there?
I don't know.
Some countries, you know, have big luxury import taxes, but don't even have any income tax at all. So, you know, if you're going to, you know, the government has to raise money somehow. I'd rather have them raise money through a tariff than through an income tax. But I'm not really familiar with the laws there. But I know where I'm operating offshore, like in the Caribbean, there's no income taxes. But yes, they have a pretty big tax. If you want to import a brand new Mercedes, you're going to pay a lot of tax. But hey, it's better than paying the income tax. But anyway, hey, thanks for the call. We're out of time. If you have anything more to add, you can hold on over the break. Meantime, stick around. We're going to talk the debates after we get back in this top of the second hour. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show at Schiff Radio.
Stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is underway, and the stock market has actually turned positive now. It was down most of the morning, and the Dow now is now up a few points. The dollar is seems like it's about the same as it was earlier. It's still a little bit down on the day, but it has nowhere near surrendered its massive gains from yesterday as people sought refuge from the storm in the dollar. And of course, I think anybody who's trying to hide out in the dollar is going to find out that they're basking in the eye of a tornado, and pretty soon they're going to be enveloped by a Category 5 monster, because I do not think there is any safety in the dollar. I think that if you really want safety, you do have to seek out something like gold, even though it is volatile, and gold, again, is down about $60 today. The gold stocks are also down. In fact, we've had a pretty big move down in the Huey Index, which made a record high just last week, and couple weeks ago, and it was as high as 635 earlier this week. I'm talking like Tuesday. It was at 635. It's now at 540. So 635 minus 540 divided by 635. That's about a 15% decline in the value of the gold stocks in 3 days. Clearly, a lot of money moving out of that market in a hurry. But if you take a look at a long-term chart, you can barely even notice it. I mean, so I think the trend is up, and I think it's a great buying opportunity for those of you who look like you were missing the boat. For people who already bought, yeah, would it have been better to have waited? Yeah, but, you don't have a crystal ball, but you can always buy more. That's the beauty of, moving into the market incrementally. And, of course, people who bought months ago, I mean, the market is still higher than it was. And so for people who were wishing that, God, I wish I'd have put a little bit more in while the prices were low, well, here's the opportunity to do it. Does it mean that they can't go any lower? Of course not. But as long as you're not buying on margin, as long as you're not using options, it doesn't really matter, does it? I think what really matters is where they go in the long run, not where they go day to day. Anyway, want to change the topic and talk about the presidential debates last night. And if anyone wants to call in, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF, to talk about these debates that were covered by Fox and Google. They were from Orlando, Florida, and the first time in a long time we had Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, joining the debates. We had him on the show a couple days ago. I think he did a pretty good job. I think he had the best line of the show, of the debates, certainly the best laugh line, where he said that his neighbor's dogs had created more shovel-ready jobs than the Obama administration. Of course, there were some other kind of funny lines. I thought Newt Gingrich got some laughs by reminding us of the joke that Ronald Reagan used to tell about the definition of recession, depression, which was when your brother-in-law is out of work, it's a recession. When you're out of work, it's a depression. And when Jimmy Carter is out of work, it's a recovery. And a lot of people maybe can remember that joke, so it can't hurt to evoke the name of Ronald Reagan in a Republican debate. I think about just about every Republican candidate might have paid homage to him last night by invoking that name in their presentation. But my opinion of the debate and how I thought the candidates fared, I think this was a debate in which I think Romney did a better job, I think, than Perry as far as, I think, Perry seemed to be really on the defensive, in my opinion, all night. And I don't know that it's going to mean that he's going to get a sympathy bump out of it. I think that, I don't know. I don't think he came off as presidential, let's say, as Romney did. I think Romney was more polished. He certainly had the nicest suit on, a suit and tie combination, so he looked the part. And he was well-spoken. I mean, I certainly disagree with his strong defense of Social Security. I mean, how could you say you're a free market guy and just sing the praises of Social Security? I mean, Social Security has been a disaster, and I wish that Perry would basically defend his comment that Social Security is a disaster. I mean, it's got an unfunded liability of tens of trillions of dollars. How could you call that a success? Now, have some people benefited from Social Security? Of course. People benefited from Bernie Madoff until the thing fell apart. Did that mean it was a success? I mean, just because some people benefit from a Ponzi scheme because they got in early, which is what Romney's point is, yeah, there are people getting checks. Of course there are people who have benefited. That's not the point. The point is at what price? The looming disaster. That is the problem. So he could still say that Social Security has been a disaster because it's about to collapse. It's a Ponzi scheme. And he should make the argument, Rick Perry should, that all the people that now depend on Social Security would be much better off today if they didn't depend on Social Security. If they actually had been able to keep their money while they were working and invest it privately so that they would have their own wealth. And so they wouldn't constantly be afraid that a politician was going to take away their benefits because they would own it. See, the people who are getting Social Security aren't entitled to those benefits. Those benefits can go away, and they will go away. They would be in much better shape if they were self-dependent, if they actually owned a retirement asset, and they would have owned them. People would be in better shape had the government not taxed them so much when they were younger. So I'd like to see a candidate actually talk about what a disaster it has been. You can still have sympathy for the people who are unfortunately have been trapped into this system and try to say, look, we're going to try our best to take care of the people who now depend on this government program, but recognize that it has been a disaster and its impact on the economy has been a disaster. But anyway, so I think that Romney, as far as who might get a bounce from this, I think he might, make some headway on Rick Perry based on the performance. One of the most frustrating things about the debate was how long I had to wait for Ron Paul to get to talk. They started by talking to Perry and Romney. So the impression is, let's deal with the front runners, and then let's go down the list. And since Ron Paul is in third place, you would think that the third person they would go to would be Ron Paul. No, they got to every other candidate with the lone exception of Gary Johnson. Now, I understand why they would ask Gary Johnson last, because after all, he's the last one to join the debate. He is low in the polls. He barely made it in with 1%. So, if you're going to call on him last, that might make sense. But why call on Ron Paul second to last? It's almost as if Fox is basically saying that these two libertarian Republicans are so marginalized that we're not even going to get to them until dead last after we get to the more serious candidates first, even though Ron Paul is ahead of all those other candidates with the lone exception of the two front runners. But again, I thought Godfather P. Herman Cain, I think he had his best performance in a while. I think he started out really good in the first debate and then kind of, was disappointing. I think he'll get a boost at it. I think he really did good in the debate. I think he's a good speaker. And he also got, some of the other candidates mentioned that they thought he was a good prospect to be their VP. Most candidates dodged the question because they didn't want to say anything good about their opponents. But then I think you want to say something good about an opponent who you really don't think is going to win. So I think he came across pretty good. Ron Paul, of course, I always like what Ron Paul says. I just wish he had more airtime because he needs to have a bigger move in the polls. I don't think he achieved that on this debate, but I still think he's going to stay in third place. But I just don't think he's going to get a big bump out of it because I don't think it was a platform where he was able to really shine. But anyway, hey, let me hear some more of your calls. We will be right back. This is Peter Schiff at Schiff Radio. It is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and we are talking about the Republican debates from last night. I've got a few callers who want to weigh in with their take. First on hold is Leon calling from Dallas, Texas. Leon, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me on. My question is actually related to debate and to the candidates in general. On what chance do you think any of the candidates, obviously excepting Ron Paul, he's the most consistent, are going to stay consistent through their potential terms and not cave, do the whole, we have to abandon capitalist principles at the end, like Bush did?
Yeah, the only ones I really trust to stick to their commitments are Ron Paul and Gary Johnson. I mean, I believe that these people are sincere in their belief and defense of liberty and capitalism because there is proof in their past deeds. So I think they will hold steadfast. Although you never know. I mean, there's a famous quote, power corrupts, and so I think Ronald Reagan was pretty much a solid believer in those principles too. Yet really ended up giving in to a lot of pressure once he became president. So you never know. But I still am very hopeful that either Ron Paul or Gary Johnson would really stay true to their principles, not waver, fight for those principles. As far as the other candidates, I just don't have the confidence that a lot of them even understand. I think they're more paying lip service to some of these ideals because the Tea Party is now in vogue. So now the Constitution and the Federal Reserve, and you've got some of these issues that Ron Paul used to be considered a kook for, and now those are the issues. They're kind of now mainstream political party, Republican Party, even if Ron Paul, for some reason, is still considered on the fringe, though his ideas have made it mainstream. The question is, the ideas are different from the implementation and what will actually be done. And, of course, many of these Republican candidates will end up tacking back to the center in the general election. And so this could just be what they talk about to Republican primary voters.
Yeah, that was my impression too. Gary Johnson, I have a good feeling about. Also, I agree with you.
I just think it's going to be a hard time for him to get elected. I mean, it's all, the with the television and with the images and the sound bites and photo ops. I just think, that either Mitt Romney or Rick Perry are just the more electable. I mean, they just more look the part. And standing next to Obama on a debate when people are looking images, I think image counts, and I think that they just more look the part than any of the other candidates actually. So, but this is going to be tough times. Anything could happen, and hey, I think a Ron Paul could win if he gets that nomination. That's just going to be the key, because I don't think it's going to be about looks if Ron is the candidate.
I think he's just going to dismantle the ideas Obama has just from any debates that would have between each other. I mean, there's just massive contrast between their ideologies, and the more consistent is the Austrian school economics.
Oh, yeah, he would be great in a debate with Obama if they really could mix it up one-on-one, where he got a lot of airtime instead of just getting a few minutes on these debates with, 7 other people on the stage. I'd love to see those debates.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah. I also, though, think Romney would do a very good job debating Obama and really making him look pretty foolish too. I think he has a good way of putting people down without it seeming as much of an insult. I think he'd be able to do that with Obama, and maybe give him a lot of backhanded type compliments where it appears to be a compliment, but it's really an insult. I think he would do a pretty good job of doing that. Anyway, hey, some of the callers seem to have dropped off. I thought I had more, but anyway, I'm going to go to Keith in Massachusetts. Keith, you're on.
Hey, Peter, how you doing? Appreciate you taking my call. Was wondering if the way the mainstream media is treating Ron Paul, if he's going to be forced to go as a third-party candidate, and how is that going to affect Obama?
Well, no, he's not going to go as a third-party candidate. I mean, he's already said he's not going to do it, and he's a man of his word. And of course, he knows he ran as a third-party candidate before. Of course, he didn't have anywhere near the following that he has today. So I think if he ran as a third-party candidate, he might be able to get 5 or 10% of the vote. But that's not going to be enough to win. He's not going to have the kind of money that Ross Perot had. I mean, he's going to have some money. He's got a following, but he doesn't have Ross Perot money unless he puts. I mean, the only way that Ron Paul might have a shot is if he found some billionaire to go as a VP, and that person was going to spend several $100 million of their own money, to get the kind of media attention that he would need to get high enough in the polls to maybe get included in the debates. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be very difficult to break through, the Democrat, the Republican. I think he knows that. I mean, that's why Ron Paul, he tried it as a libertarian for a while, didn't work, came back to the Republican Party. His son ran, he ran in the Republican Party and had success there. So I think Ron Paul is committed to being a Republican, and he's committed to trying to reshape the Republican Party more in a free market, sound money image than it had been cast in the past. Kind of more of a Ronald Reagan ideals, what Ronald Reagan stood for, not necessarily what happened during the Reagan administration, but a Republican Party that is going to try to do what Reagan promised.
Plus, it probably is going to hurt the Republican candidate if he were to do that, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that – but Ron Paul is going to get support from both sides. There's no question about it that Ron Paul gets votes from the Democrats as well as the Republicans, which is why I think he's such a good candidate on the Republican side. And it would be a great race because it would force, Obama would have to be the hawk. I mean, he would have to be the big military guy. I mean, so that would be very difficult for some of his base that are more anti-military spending to have their guy being the guy in favor of big military, and Ron Paul saying bring home the troops and cut military spending. So it's a difficult race for Obama to run against Ron Paul. But even though he's still going to draw from the left, he's going to draw more probably from the right, no question about it. And so he might, tip the election to Obama. So I don't think he wants to do that.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, Peter. We love what you do, and go vote for Ron Paul.
Yeah, well, I will when he comes to Connecticut, I guess. I mean, hopefully he could win Connecticut. Maybe I could be instrumental a little bit in that respect, helping him do better. Certainly, he'll do better than he did here in 2008 or 2008. Anyway, hey, we're coming to the end of another segment. Stick around. We got another full half hour coming up. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com. If you want to call and talk about these debates, 855-4SCHIFF. 855-4SCHIFF is the number to call. Stick around. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We're talking a bit about the presidential debates, the Republican debates last night, and I've got Nikolai on the phone from Washington. Nikolai, welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Peter. After the debate, Sean Hannity had a post-interview with Ron Paul, and Sean Hannity made a comment about Rand Paul being on Air Force One with Obama. Just curious if you had a comment about that, and how do you think Ron Paul felt about it, and what did they talk about?
Well, I saw the Hannity interviews, and I think I don't think it was bad. I mean, I think he was rather respectful to Ron Paul, and I thought he treated him fairly in that particular interview. But yeah, I don't know. I guess Rand was on Air Force One. I mean, a lot of times the president invites senators on that plane. Normally, there's some kind of agenda involved. So I don't know, but I mean, I didn't make anything of it. And apparently, the senator is going to be a guest on a Sean Hannity show, so they'll be talking about what happened on Air Force One. But I have no idea.
Hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was just a routine trip, and I'm not sure how much time Rand got to speak with the president. Hopefully, he got a lot of time because the president needs some help. He is very clueless, and Rand Paul is a good guy to clue him in.
I agree. Well, I've been looking at all the online polls, and it looks to me like Ron Paul won pretty handily. Even on
he always wins. Polls. Ron Paul always wins the online polls. I mean, Ron Paul people go on there and they vote on those polls. But CNN Fox had a focus group, and in the focus group it was all Romney. But I have a feeling that they screened that focus group. I mean, it didn't seem like there were any Ron Paul supporters in that focus group, which is odd because if it was a random sampling, there should have been a few Ron Paul guys there, and not one person even mentioned Ron Paul. So I have a feeling that when they come up with a focus group, they pre-screen you, and if you have any indication that you might like Ron Paul, I don't think you make it in the group.
Yeah,
that's just my feeling.
I agree with that.
Because I'm sure that Ron Paul had a lot of supporters in that general audience. I mean, that's for sure.
Well, I'll be curious to see what happens in the straw poll today.
Oh, that's right. Today is the straw poll down there in Florida.
Yep. So hopefully we'll get some news coverage if he does well in that.
Yeah, well, they didn't cancel it, so maybe, I don't know, maybe he's not going to win. I don't know. We'll see. Let's keep our fingers crossed, though, that he does manage to win it. But,
Peter, I got to run.
All right.
I got to talk to you.
Hey, well, thanks for calling in. Hey, I do have some sound clips from the debate. I have a couple of highlights. One in particular, which I think is going to end up being problematic for Rick Perry, was his defense of, for illegal immigrants by allowing illegal immigrants who happen to be in the state of Texas to go to Texas universities with in-state tuition. And they're in the state illegally in the first place, and he's basically giving them in-state tuition when Americans who are in the country legally who want to go to the university, if they don't live in state, are paying a much higher amount. I think that is going to come back to bite him. His excuse was kind of, it's compassion. But I don't know that that's going to fly in the Republican Party. That's kind of like a liberal argument. The problem is the road to hell and good intentions, because it does act like a magnet. If you are if you're letting people know that, hey, if you just come across the border illegally, we're going to give you a great education at a subsidized rate, it does act as a magnet, which is, I think, going to come back. But anyway, here's a little cut from Rick Perry, cut number 3.
But if you say that we should not educate children who have come into our state for no other reason than they've been brought there by no fault of their own, I don't think you have a heart. We need to be educating these children because they will become a drag on our society.
Yeah, and, you can appreciate his perspective, meaning, hey, the kids are here, their parents came here illegally, they're in the state right now, but I know when I ran in the Republican Senate that immigration was a big, hot issue. And, this is going to be problematic, I think, for him going forward, maybe even more so than the remarks on Social Security. So we'll see what happens. Again, Herman Cain, I got a little sound from him. I said I thought that he had a good night, and here he is railing against the EPA, which I think is a good strategy in a Republican primary. Here's cut number 4.
The first department, if I were forced to eliminate a department, I would start with the EPA and start all over. It's out of control. Now I know that makes some people nervous, but the EPA has gone wild. The fact that they have a regulation that goes into effect January 1st, 2012 to regulate dust says that they've gone too far.
Yeah, I want to take a look at that because I'm not even familiar with the dust regulation. I wonder if I wonder really what he's talking about there. So I got to take a look at that. But I wish they'd asked that question to Ron Paul. The question was, if you had to eliminate a department, which one would it be if you were forced to? I would have loved Ron Paul to have gotten that question because I think he would have done a good job in answering, because he would have said, wait a minute, you don't have to force me to eliminate one. I want to eliminate a whole bunch. And Ron Paul's standard answer to a question like that is, why don't you ask me which departments I'd keep, because it's going to be a much shorter list. So unfortunately, he did not get that particular question. But, I want to play some sound from Chris Matthews, again, who just constantly likes to play the race card. Of course, liberals are all about race. And in Chris Matthews' mind, white people, are a bunch of racists. And if they don't like President Obama, it's not because of his policies. It's because he's black. That's why they don't like him. And listen to this. Basically, he said that, white people will give a black guy one chance. But if he messes up, he's out. Of course, they'll give a white guy, he's white, so I'll give him a second chance. I mean, this is what this guy thinks. I mean, it really is unbelievable. Here, let's play this clip. It's clip number 1.
Professor Peterson,
yes.
Let me ask you about white votes. Do you have a sense, as you looked at politics in America, that there are some white voters who will vote for an African American, say, once, and they will hold that person to a very rigorous standard, perhaps a much higher standard than they would a white politician, and they'll give him one shot, and then they'll dump him the next time?
I mean, come on. Does anybody really say, okay, yeah, he's a black guy, I'll give him I'll give him one shot, but if he screws up, he's out. Because, you're only going to give a black guy one shot, but a white guy, if he screws up a couple of times, no big deal. We'll just keep voting for him anyway, because after all, he's white. I mean, come on. I mean, the white people that voted for Obama didn't vote for Obama. They didn't put aside their prejudices and vote for him. They voted for him because they actually believed in him. They got conned by the hope and change. It wasn't, is it possible that some white people probably said, it'd be nice to have the first black president and I'm going to vote for him? Yeah, that's possible. But that's not racism. That just like somebody might vote for a woman. Hey, it'd be nice to have a woman president. We've never had one. I'm going to vote for a woman. But, the people that voted for him didn't think, I'll vote for him and I'll just give him this one chance because after all, he's a black guy and if black guys mess up, that's it. White guys messed up. We're going to cut them some slack because they're the right race. But, the thing is, it's not just white people who are less enthusiastic about President Obama. I mean, he's lost a lot of support in the white community, but he's also lost a lot of support in the black community. He is not nearly as popular as he was among blacks. So I guess you could make the same argument then that blacks only give other blacks one shot. but they're more lenient when it comes to white people. The whole thing is nonsense. What Chris Matthews doesn't want to deal with is the fact that President Obama is losing popularity with whites and blacks, not because of the color of his skin, but because of the consequences of his policies, because of what he believes in, because of his lack of competence to do the job for which he was elected. That's why people don't like him. It's got nothing to do with his skin. But for some reason, Chris Matthews just can't seem to get by that. So I don't know. Maybe he's the one that is worried about skin color. Anyway, let me try to go back to the phones. Robert is on hold from Long Island, New York. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for taking my call, Peter.
Thanks for calling.
Since we're talking about the candidates, why is it that it's and that's why I love you so much is that you know how to draw the line and make a distinction and be objective. I'm sorry, not subjective, objective. Now, why is it that you always hear all these candidates, they're all talking about Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan. But on so many of the issues, they do exactly the complete opposite, like immigration. Ronald Reagan legalized, I think it was like 6 million Mexican immigrants. I mean, I know that the industries need, I was an entrepreneur, I had a business. You need cheap labor. People who've never been in business before don't understand. They just think, oh, you could just pay a few dollars more an hour. Why can't you? You're being cheap. They don't understand.
Well, I mean, Ronald Reagan is really an iconic figure, larger-than-life figure in the Republican Party. And he was a two-term president who nobody thought had a chance to get elected. And he talked the talk and tried to walk the walk, but people remember him very fondly. He was a charismatic guy who came to office at a bad time, and then the economy improved. And so he's really the only hero we've got. I mean, otherwise, if you want to find a Republican that had that kind, or president even, it's not even in our lifetime can you go back to find a Republican president, of that stature. So obviously everybody wants to, pay homage to Ronald Reagan and say that they're the next Reagan and all of that, even though many of them are far from it. But, hey, the one guy that did support Reagan in 76, when nobody did, and early on in the primaries in 1980 was Ron Paul. So he's the one that most has the ability to really invoke Reagan because he stood with Reagan when nobody else did. Anyway, hey, we got another segment coming up, so stick around. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. SchiffRadio.com. The final segment is here. And, during the break, I'm trying to do a little research on this EPA dust deal. And apparently it's not household dust that is in the spotlight. It's the dust at farms or ranches. I guess if you're riding a horse down a dirt road, your hooves are kicking up some dust. I have no idea how dust is a pollutant. I mean, the dust is just going to settle right back on the ground eventually. I don't see how it's any cause for pollution, but obviously to the extent that farmers and ranchers have to do something about the dust, it's obviously going to cost them money and cost them resources and waste their time and drive down their efficiency. I mean, Herman Cain is right. I mean, that agency needs to be pared back or abolished. But, of course, when you talk about it, what is the left going to say? Oh, no, he's in favor of poisonous air and poisonous water, and we're all going to die of pollutants if we let the Republicans win because they'll dismantle the EPA. Meanwhile, most of what the EPA is doing is not resulting in less pollution. It's just resulting in less productivity and lower standards of living. But, hey, I got some kind of funny clips, or actually not funny because they're true, but I thought I'll play them. One, again, I've been talking about how politicians try to incite violence or riots sometimes, and, this whole idea that we might have some looting and some rioting based on how weak the economy is going to get. Well, here you have Senator Hawkins addressing a bunch of supporters there in Iowa. Listen to what the senator has to say. This is cut number 5.
I've been with you a long time. We've been through a lot of battles together. And I'm telling you, this battle right now is one that we can't afford to lose. We got to win it, my friends. That's why we need you now more than ever. You don't need us, but we need you. We need you here raising your voices. We need you here in the halls. Yes, we need some of you are probably getting arrested for doing things you shouldn't be doing.
So he wants his supporters to get arrested for doing things they shouldn't be doing? Like what? Violence? What does he want his supporters to do, right, that they would get arrested for? Also while I'm on this subject, Ron Paul got asked about the border fence in the debate, because in the prior debate, and I wish Ron Paul would have been more specific on this, where he talked about the need to have a fence, where I always opposed it when I was running for Senate. I said, I don't want to build a fence on the southern border because we might be building it to keep the Mexicans out, but one day we might use it to keep Americans in. And Ron Paul failed to make the point that nobody is trying to escape America today. But I would have liked him to point out that things are going to get so bad in this country. If we continue on our present course, things are going to be so bad that people are actually going to want to leave. And you know what? The government might not allow it, because the government might want them in the country so that they can keep on taxing them to support the people who are on the dole. That's what happens in all these countries, all these communist countries. People want to leave, and so the government don't let you leave. And I'm not saying we're communists, but what I'm saying is when things get really bad and the young people, we keep saying, hey, we're leaving these debts to our young people. I say no, the young people can leave and stick us with the debts. But what if the government says, we can't let all these young people leave the country? What about people if they've gone to school, right, and they've taken student loans? What if the government says, you can't just leave the country, you have to repay your student loans first. You just can't go off to another country and work and just stick us with these loans. And so, what if they make it difficult to leave? And so then the students want to sneak out. And then they can't get out because there's a big fence keeping them in. I'd like Ron Paul to talk about how bad things could get if we continue on our path. Not that they're that bad yet, but that is the direction in which we are moving. And somehow, he didn't really get a chance to make that point. Anyway, hey, one other sound clip I want to see if we have time to play before the end of the show. Hey, this is all a congressional hearing, and this is in a committee, and Congressman Issa is there, who is also a chair of the committee that I testified in front of. And I guess they're trying to talk about jobs and green jobs and what might constitute a green job. And so take a listen here. This is cut number 2.
Driving a bus, just because it's hybrid, doesn't make it a green job.
Mr. Congressman, would you rather have that person unemployed?
No, I'd rather them work.
Where the taxpayers would have to pay for that? He's now paying taxes.
So basically, the argument is that if somebody is driving a bus and it's not a hybrid bus, then it's not a green job. That the only way it would be considered a green job is if we gave the bus driver a hybrid bus, even if, who knows what it would cost the country to replace the bus that we have with a new hybrid bus. I don't know what, the manufacturing process. Well, I guess maybe we just import the hybrid bus from another country so we wouldn't have to pollute our own air in the process of making it. But meanwhile, that makes it green because it's hybrid. Isn't a bus, wouldn't that just be a green job anyway, no matter what? Because if you got 50 people riding around in a bus, well, that's 50 cars that are not on the road. So even if that bus is using gasoline, it's probably using a lot less gasoline than those 50 cars would have used. And so you would think that it's green anyway. But you know what really was green energy? The railroads, rail transportation. And why did the railroads disappear in the United States? Because the government taxed the hell out of them to build the highways. Talk about anti-green. We had a great, efficient, world-class railway system that was taxed and regulated out of existence in the United States. And it wasn't just the taxes, it was all the feather bedding, it was all the stuff that was going on with the unions, that were requiring the railroads to have coalmen, right? You remember railroads used to go with steam, and you used to have to shovel coal into a furnace to get them going. And when they no longer needed a furnace, they no longer needed the coal, the union said, you can't lay these guys off. You got to pay them anyway. So all sorts of ways that the government conspired with the unions to destroy what really were truly green jobs that had been produced by the private sector. It's too bad that we don't have all these green jobs anymore. The government decided that we all needed to drive around in cars, and they had to build this international highway system. Now, of course, what was that? The Senate candidate we played in Washington, in Massachusetts yesterday. Remember, the only reason that people are rich in this country is because we built those roads. Yeah, if we didn't build those roads, no entrepreneurs would have got rich. Well, if it's so easy to get rich, if you just get rich because the government builds roads, why didn't everybody? And if it's that simple to do, if, all you need is government roads and government schools and government police, and then, you just get rich magically. Anyway, we've come to the end of the show. It's been an eventful week. I'm sure it's going to continue to be eventful next week. So make sure to tune in on Monday for a brand new episode of the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. Bye.